A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Spike Kaiser, who had some really interesting stuff to say about the Nest pension scheme. But since then, a few of you have asked about this in the Facebook group. That's meaningfulmoney.tv/community, by the way. And so I thought I'd try and put together a quick 5-minute guide to the default workplace pension that many of you will have. Okay, so when auto-enrollment came in a few years ago, Nest was identified as the kind of government-sanctioned default option that employers could choose as a scheme to provide to their employees. Now, as an employee, you don't get too much say in that, but you should still take an interest and see if you can make the best of the plan that you're in. So let's put 5 minutes on the clock here, say a quick thank you to my friends at 7 Investment Management for continuing to sponsor the show, and let's crack on. Okay. Remember that a pension is just a savings plan. It's got some particularly good perks, particularly as if you are in the Nest scheme, then you're working for somebody else and that employer is paying into it for you. That, folks, is called free money. Now, you can't access that money inside the Nest scheme until you're 55, and after 2028, it'll go to age 57. At the earliest that you can get hold of it. It's going to become state pension age minus 10 years, so it's a fairly easy sum for you to work out. But this is a long-term savings plan anyway, so that doesn't really matter. So far, so simple. Now, every month you will pay into the scheme, and so will your employer. Usually, the figures are 5% of your pay from you and 3% from your employer. 5% or 3% of what? That depends on what your employer has set up, but usually it's your basic salary. But that's 8% of your basic salary going in each month, and that's not a bad savings rate, really. And if you get started nice and early, it'll compound into a really useful sum of money one day. Now, saving is one thing, but what you actually are doing is investing. And the Nest pension acts as the box into which you put your money, and so does your boss. But then the money that you both put in gets invested. So let's talk about the investments inside the box a little bit. Nest have a limited set of options, really, for how that money should be invested. The default option is what they call their Nest retirement date funds. Now, those are invested in such a way that will be high-ish risk, right, but high-ish return, hopefully, for most of the time that you are investing. And then as you approach retirement, it will gradually be de-risked. It will start investing in less risky, less volatile stuff. Now, that sounds like a good idea, but my problem with that whole process is that it's a little bit too hands-off. What you're essentially doing is you're handing over the risk management of your pension to someone else, really, into a kind of default one-size-fits-all solution. And if you're watching this channel, maybe listening to the podcast, you're probably a little bit more hands-on than that with your money, or you want to be. Or you could use my favorite word, I can use my favorite word, you're probably more intentional about your finances. So as Spike Kaiser pointed out in my conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, Nest opt for a very cautious approach early on, particularly if you're sort of under age 27 or so. And that's just plain wrong. They call that the foundations phase. So it starts very low risk, then gets moved into high risk stuff as you really get going, and then gradually back into low risk as you approach retirement. But that early stage where they're really just not giving you much growth at all, I think that's just wrong because it robs you of some of the best compounding years, the early years of your money being invested. So personally, I would consider opting out of the retirement date funds and into one of the others, though you'd want to avoid the ethical fund that they offer for the same reason. That's a bit of a problem if ethical investing is important to you, and if it is, you're just going to have to accept that weird foundation phase investment approach that they impose on you. Given the very long time horizon you're probably going to be investing over, you could consider the higher risk fund. They have a lower risk version as well. Basically, find out what it involves and find out what you're comfortable with. But generally, if you're going to be investing for a long time and you can't access that money, you may as well push that money as hard as you can into the higher risk fund. But seek advice if you're not sure. Now, the Nest pension is fairly cheap. They charge you 1.8% of every contribution that you and your employer make. So if you put in £25 into the scheme, they would deduct 45p from that. On top of that, there's an annual management charge, which is 0.3%. So if you've got £10,000 in your pension fund, it would cost you 30 quid a year to have a Nest pension. That's how much they would charge you on it. Those charges are actually pretty low. I would obviously prefer it if there was no charge on the contributions when they go in, but If that keeps the annual charge lower, then so be it, because it's the annual charges that make a really big difference to how much your money will grow over the long term. Now, if you've got other pensions, maybe pension plans you had with previous employers or such like, you could consider transferring them into the Nest pension. Nest will allow you to do that. Always got to be careful doing that though, because there are sometimes extra benefits to your old pensions that you might be unaware of. So make sure you do your homework and seek professional advice if you're not sure. You can also transfer your Nest scheme out and into another pension. Why might you do that? Well, maybe you want more investment flexibility, or perhaps you leave the employer that offers the Nest scheme and you don't want to leave your money with Nest. You want to send it out into another scheme that perhaps you're a bit more involved with. Nest don't charge a fee for transferring out, but I don't think, from my reading of the website anyway, that they will allow partial transfers out. Why would you do that? Well, a lot of people who are interested in managing their own finances will take the employer contribution into the workplace pension, but then periodically, maybe every year or so, transfer a chunk of it out into their own SIP, their own self-invested personal pension. If you're not bothered about that, don't worry about that. But if you want to take a partial transfer out, I don't think that Nest will allow that. Now, when it comes to retirement, there's a few options with Nest, but one interesting one is that you can leave your money with them after retiring, and they will help you to manage the investments and segregate the pot of money that you've got into different pots. So the pot that maybe includes money that you're going to take out in the near term, money that you're going to leave invested for a bit, and there's also a kind of in-scheme emergency fund pot. And I think that's a pretty good idea for people who've just genuinely no interest in any of this and they want it all done for them. I was quite impressed really when I read about it. I think most people watching this channel though will want to take a greater level of personal control than that, but if you don't, then definitely look at what the in-scheme provisions are from Nest. So overall, Nest is a dead simple, fairly low cost pension plan. There are better schemes out there with more intelligent investment options, but for a fire and forget solution, it'll be okay. Just be careful of that strange, bizarre investment approach that Spike drew our attention to a couple of weeks ago. I'll link that video underneath this one. Any questions, leave them under the video. If it's been useful, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so that you find out whenever we put up a new video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you in next week's 5 Minute Friday.